Welcome to Tales from the Break Room, a chilling corner of Dead and Roasted where the coffee's cold and the stories are colder. The following content may contain graphic accounts, eerie encounters, and terrifying tales submitted by real people. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you're working the night shift, home alone, or happen to be sipping from an unopened can of soda.
Story 1.
Half the woman she used to be from. Neck, I'm Tyler. I was when this happened last year. I dropped out of my community college after 3 semesters because honestly I had no clue what I was doing there except burning through student loans. My parents weren't exactly thrilled, but they'd been through the same song and dance with my older sister before, who eventually got her act together, so they gave me months of a break to find a job before they'd reevaluate my living situation. Translation: get your crap together or get out. I applied everywhere. Retail, restaurants, warehouses, but it turns out a history of skipping classes doesn't exactly build the kind of work ethic employers are looking for. Who knew when I landed a security guard position at a local memorial graveyard. I felt like I'd won the lottery bucks an hour, and all I had to do was basically sit on my rear all night in a little guard shack by the entrance. The job posting had said facility and grounds security, which sounded official enough for my resume. Grounds turned out to mean graveyard, as I mentioned, like an actual cemetery with dead people and all that. Funny enough, they barely brought that up in the interview. It was just a precaution, my supervisor had assured me. During my one-night training session, my supervisor was about with the sagging face of someone who'd seen too much of life and decided it wasn't worth getting excited about anymore. I did not want to end up like him. Now, we've had some vandalism issues in the past. Teenagers. Mostly your job is to walk the grounds once every 2 hours, check that the mausoleum is secure, and call the police. If you see anything suspicious, the rest of the time I was just free to watch Netflix or read or whatever. As long as I stayed awake and didn't leave the property easy. Money, the first few shifts I had were boring as heck. I would do my rounds, shining my flashlight between headstones, trying not to get freaked out. Then I'd return to the guard shack. Really, it was just a small office building with a desk, mini fridge, microwave, and bathroom. I'd scroll through TikTok until it was time to do the rounds. Again, by the second week, I was dying for human interaction when my buddy Maddie texted me asking what was up. I mentioned my job seriously. You're guarding dead people. Now he texted back, I mean, he wasn't wrong, right? That's wild. Can we come hang? Me and Parker are bored. I wasn't sure just yet, but after seconds I said, sure, after midnight park on the street and walk on in. I don't want the cameras catching your car. That's how it started, just a stupid decision because I was lonely and bored when I was supposed to be working. Maddie and Parker showed up around carrying a bag of chips and energy drinks. No alcohol, though. We weren't complete idiots, just regular idiots. Dude, this place is so creepy, Parker said, looking around the small office. Parker was the nervous type, always expecting the worst out of every situation. We'd been friends since high school, mainly because he'd laugh at all my jokes even when they weren't funny. Maddie dropped into the spare chair saying, could be worse. My cousin works night shift at a meat processing plant. If the boredom doesn't kill you, the smells will. We spent the next hour just shooting the breeze. It did feel good to talk to someone after a week of solitude. Around a.m., the conversation turned to what we were all doing with our lives. Maddie said, I'm thinking about going back to finish my degree. My dad says the electrician program only takes years and they're always hiring smart. Parker said, I'm already grand in debt and not even halfway through my program. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. At least you're working towards something, I said. I've got debt and nothing to show for it. That's why this job is perfect for you. Dead end. Job and a literal dead end. Maddie laughed. Ha! I rolled my eyes. It's temporary, just until I figure things out. Parker got a little too serious, and his version of serious was anything but to me. Aren't we all temporary, though? Like all these people buried out here, man. They had plans, too. Oh, God. Parker, way to bring down the... A scream cut off Maddie mid-sentence. It was high-pitched and terrifying, a woman's voice somewhere outside in the dark. I think the 3 of us stopped breathing then and looked at each other. What the heck? I started. Tell me. You heard that? Parker whispered. The scream came again. It didn't sound like someone messing around or playing a prank. It sounded like someone in torment. Dude, You're the security guard. We need to check that out, Maddie said, already standing up. Are you insane? Parker argued. That's how people get killed. I grabbed my flashlight. No, he's right. Someone could be hurt out there. It's literally my job to investigate suspicious activity. Reluctantly, Parker followed us. Outside, the night was cold and just perfect, because there was a light fog. Between the gravestones, I aimed my flashlight ahead, and we moved toward where we thought the sound had come from. Hello. I tried my best to sound like I had some sense of authority. This is security. Is anyone out there? Silence. We wandered through the gravestones for about minutes, calling out here and there, listening for a response or anything, but got nothing. I swear it came from over here, Maddie insisted, pointing toward an old section of the cemetery. We followed him to an area I'd noticed during my rounds, but I never paid much attention to it till now. The gravestones. Here were different, much older, more weathered. Some were tilted a bit like they might fall over at the slightest touch, unlike the meticulously maintained newer sections. This part looked neglected, forgotten. Even I swept my light across the names. And dates, they were from the early S, and some even older than that. I don't remember the first name, but the one I came across read Crane through. Beloved daughter. Can we go back now? Parker was desperate to go back to the office. There's nobody out here, I guess. Maybe it was an animal. Honestly, I didn't know, though. I didn't know of any animal that could make a sound like that. We went back to the guard shack, all of us a bit creeped out, but relieved to be back inside. That was weird, Maddie said, dropping back into the chair. You think in some crazy physics way wind could sound like that? I remember Parker rolling his eyes. Maddie, wind doesn't scream, help. Me in a woman's voice. Did you actually hear words? I asked him. All I heard was screaming. Parker looked at me confused. You didn't hear her begging for help? Maddie and I looked at each other, then back at him. Maddie confirmed. I didn't hear any words either, dude. Great, so I'm the paranoid one. Hearing ghosts, that's reassuring. He grabbed another energy drink, probably. To take the edge off, I tried to laugh about it, but I wasn't fully relaxed just yet while Maddie started to tell a story about a prank he pulled in high school, and after that, we were all joking again. No longer tense, but that was when the scream came back. This time there was no mistaking it, especially after what followed sounded like sobbing. That's it, Parker said, standing up. I'm leaving. Wait, I grabbed his arm. We need to check this out. What if there really is someone hurt? Then call the cops, he argued. Isn't that your protocol? He was correct, but something compelled me to take a look first. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have much to show or tell the police. Imagine calling the cops at your job. They show up and all you say is, I heard a creepy scream. When they go out and look and find nothing, I'd probably get in some trouble. Just one more quick check, man. I insisted. We'll go together. Do you really want to walk back to the car? Alone, that seemed to convince Parker. He didn't seem so sure at first, but he relented. The sobbing sound was continuous, making it easier to follow it. Led us back to the same section of old graves. But now the sound seemed to be moving, so I was certain it was coming from someone who shouldn't be here. Not a ghost or anything like that. Hey, we're here to help, I tried to say, but the crying then stopped. There, Maddie pointed to something on the ground about FT ahead. I pointed my flashlight, and there I found it when I saw it. It felt like the world was spinning legs. A woman's legs severed at the waist, lying in the damp grass between two gravestones. She was, or had been, wearing a long white skirt now soaked with blood. The cut was jagged, and horrible bits of spine and viscera visible in the flashlight's beam. Parker threw up. Maddie, I think, was just standing there. We need to call the cops, managed to say, right now. I took out my phone, my hands shaking worse than ever. I dialed. I explained where we were and what we'd found, and dispatch told us to return to the guard shack and wait for officers to arrive. We didn't need to be told. We practically ran back to that office, none of us wanting to be near that grotesque display a second longer than necessary, and we didn't speak. The three of us looked like shell-shocked soldiers. We had just found a human being torn in half, just discarded in some graveyard. About minutes later, the police showed up, 2 officers in a patrol car. I was honestly surprised that an ambulance, or whoever they sent for dead bodies, didn't show up. I met them at the entrance and led them toward the old section, explaining what we found. We were, doing a routine patrol, I lied, leaving out the part about my friends coming for a visit. When we heard screaming, I investigated and found her. The officers looked appropriately serious as I led them to the spot, except when we got there was nothing. There, I don't understand. It was right here between these two graves. The officers went from concerned to stern. Son, the older one said, have you been drinking tonight? What? No, I've been working. All right, how about drugs? Anything that might cause. I'm telling you, there was a body. Half a body right here. There was blood, a white skirt. I was starting to freak out on them, probably making a worse case for myself. The younger guy was examining the ground with his own light. No blood here, no disturbance in the grass at all. That's impossible. My friends saw it too. Friends? I thought you said you investigated it and found it. I closed my eyes for a second, knowing I messed up. I had some friends visit during my shift. They're back at the guard. Shaq, the officers, had me led them to the office. Parker and Maddie were waiting there and looked even more terrified when they saw the police. They questioned all of us separately and established that yes, we actually did see the same thing, but no, there was no evidence of it now. They seemed to be at a loss. Listen, the older officer finally said, addressing all of us. Making false reports is a serious offense. So is trespassing on private property after hours. He pointed at my friends. We're not making anything up. Sir, we saw it, Maddie insisted. And now it's gone. No blood, no body parts, no evidence of any kind that a crime occurred, or that anyone else was out in the cemetery. Tonight maybe someone moved it while we were waiting for you guys, Parker said. But he looked ready to pass out after saying it. The guy was horrible under pressure. The younger officer shook his head. We responded quite quickly within minutes of the call. The area between here and where you claim to have found the remains has been in our line of sight the entire time. Nobody has come or went. I'm going to chalk this up to a combination of late-night jitters, guys. Maybe you were telling each other scary stories, possibly doing some substance that we're not detecting, the older officer told us. But consider this your warning. Next time we're called out here for nothing, there will be consequences. Understand me? We agreed. After they left, the three of us sat there in silence for several more minutes. Eventually, Maddie spoke up. What the actual heck just happened? I don't know, man, I said. We all saw it, right? I'm not losing my mind. We saw it, Parker. Confirmed. But how could it just disappear? Well, we didn't have an answer. To that, we decided Parker and Maddie would stay until my shift ended at AM. Safety in numbers. Even if we were dealing with something that defied explanation by AM. We heard the scream again. Maybe it was just us being scared now, but it sounded worse, like it was in even more agony. We stayed put, huddled in that. Office lights on and doors locked. Ignore it. I kept telling the two of them it's not real, but it sounded very real, so real that every instinct told me to help to find whoever was in such pain. The screams lasted for nearly minutes, before abruptly getting cut off. Cut off. I hate the sound of that. Now the silence afterwards was even worse. Somehow we sat there for a while, waiting for the next sound, whatever that might be. After a few minutes there was a soft tap on the door. Tap, tap, tap. None of us moved, even as I thought for just a moment that it might be the officers coming back for some reason. Tap, tap, tap. Louder now, don't, Maddie whispered when I glanced towards the door. The tapping then became a knock, and soon a pounding that shook the door. Then the pounding stopped for a moment. I thought whoever it was had finally given up, but then came laughter. Laughter. It started as a low chuckle, then built into a hysterical, unhinged laugh. I felt like the butt of a joke. Then all at once it stopped. Complete silence once more. None of us spoke or moved until the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. Only then did we go outside. I remember feeling so paranoid that we'd open the door and there'd be another half of a person just lying there, but instead we found a peaceful-looking cemetery in the morning light. My replacement arrived at AM. Looking annoyingly well-rested, I handed over my flashlight and keys. Without explanation, signed out and left with Maddie and Parker. We didn't talk about what happened in the car. We tried to bring up different conversation that was very forced, and it did help relieve some of the tension. I called my supervisor that morning, told him I wouldn't be coming. Back I explained. It wasn't worth it. And that's it. A couple weeks later, re-enrolled in my community college, I decided to major in accounting. Nothing exciting happens to accountants, right? And that seemed very appealing ever since then. I've never truly been back to the graveyard. But some of my destinations brought me driving by. But when I do drive by, I force myself not to look in that direction because I'm scared I'll see something again. So far, so good. No more half corpses, no more laughing. This was by far the scariest experience I've ever had at any job, and it's enough to give a person.
Story 2.
PTSD. Why have a break room when you can have a break yard? From Ishall. When I used to work as a cop, I would use the cemetery at the edge of town for my unofficial break spot. I found it by accident, actually responding to a call about teenagers drinking out there, but usually there's no kids. Just quiet, the perfect place to eat or smoke, or just sit without dispatch or the sergeant breathing down your neck for minutes. Nothing spectacular about the place, about acres of flat land with a chain-link fence and an unlocked gate far. As I've seen, there's headstones dating back from the S and up, with the newer ones up front. There are some trees around the perimeter, oaks and a few pine trees. The middle area is wide open, though just graves and short grass and sky for years straight. That was my spot, and nothing crazy ever happened. There I parked my cruiser, ate a sandwich, listened to the scanner, then headed back to patrol. Sometimes I'd walk between the headstones, though, reading names, wondering what kind of lives these people lived. It was peaceful one evening. I was midway through a turkey sub sandwich when I heard it, this weird sound like a cough, but deeper, and I thought maybe it was an animal call of some sort, maybe a big buck, maybe a sickly coyote. We've gotten both before, though they usually avoid people. I clicked on my mag light and swept the beam across the graveyard. I didn't see anything. No figures, no movement. I began to eat my sandwich again, chalking it up to my imagination. About a minute or two later, I heard it again, definitely some sort of super deep, rough cough, followed by heavy breathing. Mid-bite, I called out, "Police officer!" I swallowed, then told them to identify themselves, but it was just quiet for the next minute. I set my food down and stepped away from the vehicle. Our department teaches that we should investigate any suspicious circumstances. Even off call, the cemetery was flat and open, and my cruiser was parked on the access road cutting through the middle to my left. Maybe yards away, I swear, I caught movement, and then I saw something large. I directed my light towards it, but there was nothing there until I saw something in my beam as I continued to sweep. 2 eyes blue, but these eyes were way too high. And these eyes had to be at least fat off the ground. Nothing to stand on out there, I'm telling you. No monuments tall enough in that section. Just flat ground and modest headstones. Training kicks in when fear hits. Maintain visual contact radio for backup if necessary. Identify the threat. I looked behind me for a moment, making sure I didn't run into something, and when I turned ahead again, the eyes were gone. But then they reappeared yards to my right. There had been no sound of movement, no visible figure below them, just eyes floating in the shadows. I wanted to follow. Procedure. I wish that was my instinct in this situation. I wish I could say I had the balls to investigate, or at minimum call it in, but I didn't. I power walked right over to my cruiser and drove away. Drove straight to the Hour Diner across town and drank some coffee until I felt a bit better. Nothing crazy happened. No crime was committed, so I didn't have anything to report. I avoided that cemetery for a while after that. Found a new spot, an empty parking lot behind an abandoned Walmart. Not as peaceful, but nothing looked at me from impossible heights. A few months passed by. Management changed at the precinct. A new sergeant was writing everyone hard about staying visible in patrol zones. No more extended breaks and empty parking lots. After a pretty rough domestic call one day, I needed some quiet. Despite the new rules, my old cemetery spot was calling to me. Just one more time, I told myself. A quick break, stay in the car, then back to patrol. Minutes to midnight. It was cold enough to see my breath, I remember. There was a half moon in the sky, giving off just enough light to make out the rows of headstones. I parked in my usual spot and unwrapped some dinner meatloaf, cold but edible, and to be real with you, I preferred it cold. I kept the engine running and the heater on. I had the windows up and the radio was on low, and I was hyper aware of my surroundings in a way I'd never been before. Nothing unusual happened for it. While it was quiet and I was enjoying my food, the occasional static from dispatch made me jump a little bit, but I was really relaxed again, thinking maybe that night a while back was just stress, fatigue, a large bird I'd somehow misidentified. I suddenly heard something, though footsteps extremely heavy. Footsteps circling my cruiser. The instinct to dismiss the sound fought with my training to investigate, and my training won. I reached for my mag light, rolled down the window just enough to point it out. The beam caught nothing but headstones and frost-covered grass. The footsteps stopped the moment my window opened, as if whoever was out there or whatever had heard it. I waited and listened. Nothing, but then suddenly, something scraped against the rear bumper of my cruiser, a sound like heavy fabric or fur brushing metal. I spun around in my seat, pointing the flashlight toward the back window. For a split second, I caught the sight of something big and brown and covered in fur. This wasn't a person, and it was way too big to be a coyote or a deer, I know. I saw it ducking down behind my vehicle just out of sight. My heart became jellified. My fight or flight instinct kicked in, leaving my training in the dust. I dropped my light, forgot my food, and put the cruiser in drive, pulling away forward the whole time I watched the rear view. But when I pulled forward, there was nothing behind me. Nothing visible anyway. An empty cemetery where something large enough to look into my window had been seconds earlier. Something that could not have disappeared in the open ground behind my vehicle, but somehow it had. I never went back there again. I gave up my spot to this day. I have no idea what I saw. Don't really want to know. Honestly, I've responded to calls near there, but never alone and never at night. So many years on the force teaches you. Most things have an explanation, that the real monsters are people, but it also teaches you this. Sometimes the explanation is simply that there are things in this world that you can't explain, and maybe monsters are just people like you and I sometimes.
Story 3.
The scariest thing that ever happened to me, from Jeffrey. This story I'm about to share with you is the reason why I cannot stand churches, not because I'm not a religious guy or anything deep like that. It's because of what happened when I was years old at the chapel my dad used to work at, or occasionally work at. Dad wasn't a full-time grave digger. He worked in construction mostly, but he had this arrangement with the priest, who also managed the cemetery whenever they needed an extra hand for a burial or whenever someone called in sick. Dad would fill in. Dad had said it was extra pay that he sorely needed back in the summer of, if I recall right. Mom had just lost her job back then. She had been working at the bank and got laid off when that happened. I recall thinking, if a bank is laying people off, that can't be good. Maybe my kid self was onto something, or I was just silly. It was late June, a blistering Alabama afternoon where the humidity makes it feel like you're breathing through a wet towel or something. School had been out for about weeks by then, and Dad got a call from the priest asking if he could finish a grave that evening. The regular guy had heat exhaustion or something. Sorry, this is old memories. But as I get closer to the events of the story, things will get a bit more sharp. I remember my dad asked if my mom could watch me that evening. He was jingling his keys in his hand, ready to go. Mom had to take my little sister to some doctor's appointment 2 towns over, saying they wouldn't be back till dinner. And back then I couldn't watch myself, wasn't old enough. With a sigh, my dad looked down at me and said, "Guess you're coming with me, bud." And he told me to grab something to keep myself busy. I grabbed my Game Boy Advance. I got that cool transparent purple one for Christmas, and my grandparents got me Pokemon Ruby, and that was my obsession at the time. I was working on completing my Pokedex, and I had just caught a trapinch in that desert area. The drive to the church graveyard was about minutes, and it was mostly quiet except for Dad's talk radio and the rattling air conditioner in our old Chevy when we pulled up to the cemetery gates. The priest was there waiting in a golf cart. He said something along the lines of, "Sorry about this," that the usual gravedigger had left him high and dry with the burial that needed done, that the family would be coming tomorrow morning at, so Dad basically had a hole to dig. The rest of Dad told him no problem and asked him where his kid could wait, pointing to me. Said it was too hot to leave me in the car. I remember looking up, and the priest looked at me, then pointed to the small white chapel at the edge of the cemetery. "Chapel's open air. Conditioning's on for tomorrow's service. Nobody's in there right now," Dad said. "Perfect." then turned to me, telling me to stay put in there until I was done, and not to go wandering around the graves. "Yes, sir," I said, already pulling out my Game Boy. I wasn't planning on exploring anything that wasn't rendered in pixels. The chapel was small but nice, with maybe rows of wooden pews. There was sunlight streaming through some stained glass windows, and I thought it looked pretty cool, and the air was practically blissful compared to the swampy heat. Outside, I slid into a pew about halfway to the front, kicking off my shoes, and settling in the church was super quiet. Only thing I could hear was the air conditioner I powered on my Game Boy. The startup sound echoed in the empty space. It was funny playing Pokemon in church a year or two before that. Maybe a bit earlier, I'm not sure. Our neighbor had been telling my mom that Pokemon was teaching kids to summon demons. She'd seen it on the Christian channel. Mom rolled her eyes at that, and when the neighbor left, she told me not to listen to all that and not to worry about it. Some people see the devil in everything. She told me Dad was even more direct about it. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," he said. My parents were pretty cool like that, still sitting there in that empty church with my game. I felt a little bit rebellious, like maybe I was getting away with something I shouldn't be. I had been playing for about minutes, grinding levels in the tall grass outside for Tree City, when I first heard it, a sound from the hallway to my left. The hallway that led to the rest of the building, I assumed it was pretty faint, like someone shifting their weight on the old floor, but then unmistakably I heard footsteps. I looked up from my game, then thinking I was going to see the priest, but the hallway was dark, so dark that I couldn't see much past it. The footsteps sounded like they walked right up to the edge where the hallway met the sanctuary, then stopped. Just at the boundary between light and dark, I couldn't see anyone standing there, though I wanted to call out, but I was an awkward kid, and I didn't want to bring attention to myself if it was a stranger, a worker staying behind late. But then so quick and fleeting I nearly missed it come. Here it wasn't very loud at all, so it wasn't particularly scary in itself, just those two words spoken like someone trying to get my attention, without making much noise. I stared back at the hallway, squinting to see if someone was playing a joke. I called out, asking if it was the priest, saying, "Is that you?" But there was no more talking. I thought I'd imagined it then, that the air conditioner was making some sounds which sounded like words in some way. Could have been the game sound, effects echoing in the sanctuary too. I thought after a moment. I went back to playing though. I turned the volume down quite a bit for about minutes. Everything was normal again. I caught a Swablu and was pretty excited about it since I needed one for my Pokedex. I was reabsorbed in the game, the way kids often get, forgetting about everything else around me. But then I heard it again. "Come here." It was much clearer, still at the edge of where I couldn't see who might be speaking, but it was definitely real. Saved my game, because even when you're scared, a kid has his priorities, and I switched off the power. "Somebody there," I called back, trying to sound as brave as my dad might be in this kind of situation. This isn't funny. Still, no one replied to me. I slid to the end of the pew, feeling goosebumps on the back of my neck. The hallway was maybe a foot or so away from me, and from that angle I could see a little better, but it was still too dark to make out anything clearly. Still, no sign of anyone. "I'm going to tell my dad. I have warned no one in particular," a threat that certainly wouldn't work against a murderer or kidnapper if that's what it was. "He's right outside." I had that feeling you get when you know someone is watching you even when you can't see them. I was trying to work up the courage to either go look in the hallway myself or run outside when something happened. Thump, thump, thump. 3 loud footsteps, starting much closer than the hallway, walked right up to me, as if whatever had been there had somehow crossed the space between us without walking the distance. After those 3 steps, it was just right there, and yet I didn't see anything. The sudden sounds made me scream a quick, startled yelp like a hurt puppy. I clapped my hands over my ears, too, and squeezed my eyes shut. That was the fastest my heart ever raced for a while I stayed frozen like that, my eyes shut, ears covered, and waiting. I waited for whatever it was to go away, to leave me alone, to hopefully just be my imagination. When nothing happened after that, I slowly lowered my hands and opened my eyes back up. The church looked exactly the same. Empty pews, colored lights from the stained glass. No one in there with me. I began to breathe again. Just nothing. Dad always did say. My imagination worked. Over time, come here right in my ear. I heard it again so close I could feel someone's breath. I dropped my Game Boy and ran as fast as I could to the front of the church, opening the 2 heavy wooden doors. My next clear memory is standing in the cemetery, screaming and crying, my throat going raw. Dad came running from somewhere among the headstones, his shovel still in his hand, dirt on his jeans. His face went from annoyed to concerned in an instant when he saw me. "Jeffrey, what happened? Are you hurt?" He knelt down and put his hands on my shoulders, checking me for injuries. I couldn't stop crying long enough to form complete sentences. "Someone in the church," it said. "Come here." Right in my ear. "Slow down, son," Dad said. His voice was so calm and serious. "You heard someone in the church with you?" I nodded like a crazy person, repeatedly and frantically, and pointed back at the building in the hallway. It was right beside me, but I couldn't see anyone. Dad looked at the chapel. "Stay right here by the gate." "Okay, don't move." He jogged over to his truck, pulling something out from under the seat. I realized later it was a baseball bat, which he always kept there. Then he headed inside the church. I watched him push open the doors and disappear inside, all while I sat there, shaking like a leaf. Those were the longest minutes of my life. I stood by the cemetery gate, terrified that my dad would never come back, that whatever had whispered to me in there had dragged my dad away to hell, all because I played Pokemon in the sanctuary. When he finally came back, he was holding my Game Boy. "Nobody there," he said. He handed me my game. I checked all the rooms and closets everywhere. Doors were all locked from the inside except the front. "But I believe he heard something," Dad explained, "but there's nobody in there now. Probably the AC making some weird noise. Old buildings talk sometimes." "Son." Even then I didn't think it was just the building, not just the air conditioner. Either buildings don't walk up to you from nowhere and whisper in your ear with breath you can feel on your skin. But I also understood the look on my dad's face, the look that said, "Quit asking about it." On the drive home, Dad tried to distract me by asking about my Pokemon game. I answered in just single words. Eventually he said, "Listen, I have to help the priest again next week. If you want, you can wait in the car instead. I'll leave the truck on so you can run the AC." It was his way of acknowledging what happened without actually saying he believed me. I agreed to it and felt way more relieved. I never did have to go back inside that church on the days I had to go back with Dad in the cemetery. I'd sit in the car with the doors locked, windows up, even in the hottest part of summer. Sometimes I'd look toward the chapel and wonder if something was standing in the hallway waiting for another visitor. Dad didn't bring up the incident with me again. But a few weeks after that, I did overhear him talking to my mom when they probably thought I was sleeping. "Chapels built on the oldest part of that graveyard," he was saying. "Ed told me they moved headstones, but not the bodies when they built it in." He said that sometimes that old organ plays itself during funerals, just a few notes you think Jeffrey really heard. Something my mom asked. There was a long pause before my dad answered. "I don't know what he heard, but when I went in there to grab his game, it was cold in there, middle of June, AC struggling to keep up, but right there in the middle of the aisle, cold as January, Jim. I'm not saying it was anything, hun, but I'm not going to make him go back in there." Okay, that was about years ago. Dad stopped doing cemetery work a year later. When he got promoted at his construction job, that chapel actually burned down in electrical fire. They said they built a new one, bigger and brighter, hopefully with no dark hallways on the inside. I've gone to churches since then, for weddings or funerals or Christmas services with my wife's family. Never had another bad experience with one, and it didn't scare me away from Pokemon, the newer versions on my Switch. I still play. I've played through Sword and Shield with my daughter. No problem there, but you better believe for the good part of a decade after that experience I was pretty afraid of the dark. It seems it's not just strange people that you should ignore when they tell you to come here in a whispered voice, but also those things you can't even see when they're right in front of you.
Story 4.
Confessions of a Caretaker, by Anonymous. I was 24 years old when this happened, a biology undergrad with plans for environmental science graduate work. Rational to a fault, according to my own friends. I was a skeptical person about the paranormal, ghost stories and all that. Never really thought I'd be submitting a story to a podcast like this. But here I am. I know what I experienced, even if I can't fully explain it. Maybe someone out there can make sense of what happened to me during those 6 weeks I spent alone at that cemetery. I took a winter caretaker position at the cemetery. I needed to save money for grad school applications. The listing promised free housing and minimal responsibilities. Just basic groundskeeping stuff and security for 5 months during the off-season. What they didn't mention was why the position had opened up in the first place. I arrived in the afternoon. The county parks department admin handed me keys with a tight smile. I was told the previous caretaker had left unexpectedly. Personal health issues. Nothing to worry about, she said. She hurried through some paperwork and I left. Didn't give it a second thought. The cabin itself was smaller than I expected. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a bathroom that felt like an afterthought. Everything had been thoroughly cleaned. I could still smell the bleach in the place. But it didn't really help that much. There was still this musty undertone. What struck me odd at first were the locks. Every interior door had a new deadbolt installed. Even the bathroom. Who needs to lock themselves in the bathroom of a graveyard? I found the maintenance logbook on the kitchen counter. The previous caretaker had kept meticulous records at first. Flipping through it, I saw fertilizer schedules, equipment maintenance, weather patterns. But as the logbook went on, the entries became shorter, less about cemetery maintenance and more about disturbances at night. I read, scratching sounds in east wall again, and another part that said, noise in the walls, 21:17 a.m. I almost called the parks department right then, but it was already after hours, and I needed this job. Even if the logbook was a bit eerie, the caretaker's mental health was not my concern. After all, maybe the isolation had gotten to him out here. The cemetery was nearly 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by dense forest. Perfect for someone like me who needed solitude to study, but perhaps not for everybody. During my first week there, I installed winter grave blankets on the newer plots. It was then that I noticed the depressions in the soil near the older section of headstones. They were too uniform to be animal burrows. They were small and perfectly round holes, about the diameter of a golf ball. They appeared in clusters around certain graves. When I mentioned them to my supervisor over the phone, he shrugged it off, told me to just fill them in if they bothered me that much. They did bother me, but I had other concerns by then. The scratching started on my 6th night. I thought it was mice in the walls. An old building in the woods would naturally have rodents. It was actually a relief that the creepy notes in the logbook were just about mice in the walls. But then again, mice don't usually follow you from room to room through the walls. These sounds did. Whenever I moved to a different part of the cabin, the scratching would stop, then resume in the wall closest to where I stood. It was subtle at first and easy to dismiss, but it grew more insistent as the days wore on. I discovered the basement door almost by accident. The cabin's lower level had a dirt floor and stone foundation, used mainly for storage. The door was set into the north wall, hidden partially behind an old shelving unit. Unlike the rough stonework around it, this door was solid metal and had a heavy padlock. It looked much newer than the cabin itself. My curiosity got the better of me. The padlock key was on my keyring, labeled drainage access. Inside, it was a narrow tunnel, maybe 3 feet high, lined with old ceramic pipes that branched off in different directions. The air smelled like old wet dirt and something metallic. The maintenance binder had no maps of this drainage system, which seemed odd for something so extensive and new. I locked the door back up and tried not to think about it. But that night the scratching came back, louder, and with it was a tapping sound, almost rhythmic. I started to leave the radio on just to drown it out. Late into the month, I noticed 2 more unsettling patterns. First, my cell phone, which would work perfectly everywhere on the cemetery grounds, full signal strength too, would stop working inside the cabin only after the sun went down. What kind of sense does that make? I could stand in the doorway with perfect reception, take 1 step inside, and lose all bars again. It made no technical sense. Second, things began to disappear, only to reappear later in different places. My pocket knife vanished from the nightstand drawer. I found it 3 days later in the kitchen, tucked behind the toaster. Somehow, a missing sock of mine turned up stuffed into a heating vent, the fabric all frayed and damp. That was weird. I didn't want to end up like the previous caretaker, seeing threats and shadows. but I couldn't deny the evidence mounting around me. I started to lock my bedroom door at night, grateful for the new deadbolt that the Parks Department had installed without explanation. I began to lock the doors behind me as I moved through the small space of the cabin, just to be safe. One day, a delivery driver brought by some supplies I had ordered online. He refused to even come close to the cabin. He left the package at the main cemetery gate, nearly a quarter-mile away. "Company policy for this address," he said, already backing toward his truck. Wouldn't even make eye contact with me. Wait, I called. "Did something happen here? Do you know why that's company policy?" The driver paused. I was thankful that he even listened to me at all. "I don't know much, sorry. Most I know is that the last guy who worked here was really strange and scared the previous delivery driver, so now we just leave stuff at the gate." I thanked him and took my package back to the cabin. That night, I swear to God I heard giggling behind the bathroom wall. It wasn't in my head, mind you. It was clear as day. I even stopped brushing my teeth, faced the wall, and listened to it. But it kept happening for a few seconds. Maybe I am crazy, who knows? The next morning, though, I found these tiny muddy spots behind the toilet, like drops of mud, or maybe footprints. I took photos of it, called the Parks Department after that, but they didn't care. Snow came early that year. A heavy storm left the cemetery isolated, and the roads were impassable for days. I took the time to investigate the basement tunnel a bit better. I removed the padlock, brought a flashlight, and a hammer for backup. When I opened up the tunnel, that metallic smell I mentioned before was now stronger. It smelled of copper. The drainage pipes were large enough for a small adult to crawl through, though I didn't attempt it. Instead, I simply photographed what I could see. But still, there was nothing of note. That night, I woke at 3:00 a.m. to whispering sounds outside the bedroom door. Multiple voices, high-pitched but quiet, like I'd stumbled upon the middle of a conversation. This lasted for a few minutes, and then there was silence. When I woke up in the morning, I was horrified to discover a trail of dirt leading from the basement door to my bed. Small boot prints, no mistaking it. I didn't stay another night. I packed a bag, locked the cabin behind me, and walked 2 miles through snow to the main road. I left the keys in the park department drop box with a note citing personal health reasons for my departure. They called me twice, asking questions about missing equipment and why I abandoned my position. I didn't mention the bedroom footprints or the whispering. I simply said that the isolation was not good for me. What in the heck is going on in that place? I'll never know. And it's not my responsibility anymore, so I don't care to know. That'll be up to the next guy to deal with. But if you have any guess, be my guest, and let me know what you think.
Story 5.
Dear Mr. James Holger, in 3 days' time from this letter arriving, you will receive an invitation. It will be from your old friend Walter Coven. It will talk of a party that you will be the guest of honor for. Go to it and kill Mr. Coven. We hoped that he would never discover the secrets of his family's history, but to the detriment of all mankind, he has. The box of bullets that came with this letter are for your Webley revolver. They are special, as they are encased within a layer of sap. The sap came from a tree that is one of a kind, one that could only grow over a dead priest's grave. Use that ammo on Walter. Kill him before it's too late. If all works out as we think it will, we will contact you again soon. From a man who knows much. James awoke in a chair that was behind a large wooden desk. His vision was blurry, not knowing where he was for a moment. Stacks of papers covered most of the top of it. His Webley revolver was on the stack that was closest to him. A thick string went from its handle and had been looped around his belt. An old habit he's had since he fought the Germans in the Great War. His leather jacket hung on a coat rack next to the door of the dimly lit room. His white undershirt looked to have blood on it and was soaked through with sweat. His black pants had stains on them as well, looking to be more blood or some wine. His long hair was a mess, too. He reached into his pocket to grab his watch. It wasn't there for some reason, having no idea where it could even be. James stumbled to a clock that stood on the far side of the study. The room was dark. Boards creaked under his boots with every step. Heavy rain could be heard outside, rain pelting the large stained glass windows of the study. Lightning flashed for a moment before it dissipated back into the darkness. The lights flickered, or just stopped working completely for a few seconds at a time. Once he got to it, he read what it said, 11:40 p.m. He needed to get out. Now. Once midnight strikes, once this clock rings out that a new day has come, he's dead, along with everybody else in the town below. James checked how much ammo he had remaining for his revolver that wasn't already loaded. 12 rounds, all blessed with the holy sap that came from a tree. He didn't know how that stuff worked. From what he had seen Walter do these past couple days, it didn't matter. His old friend needed to die. James had hoped, though, that he could have reasoned with him, that he could have had him stop the ritual, to have him revert from the monster he was slowly becoming. What he had seen was nothing short of supernatural. Everybody else was dead besides him and that creature now. This manor that sat atop the hill above the small town of Bromer was soon to be his tomb. He had to focus down the paths, remember where he had been before. Something was in the wine Walter had given to him. To all of them. He barely remembered 5 minutes ago, let alone when he had first arrived 2 days prior. Bits and pieces were all he could think of, like fragments of a mirror that had been shattered, with most of the pieces being lost to him. The concoction he had been given, though, is slowly wearing off. Minute by minute he is able to remember more and more of what had occurred. Just when James thought his luck wasn't able to get any worse, the lights went out completely. He had heard a pop before all of the lights exploded in their sockets, making him duck for cover from all their shrapnel. "You are the last, James. An outcome I had hoped for," said Walter, voice booming down the halls at James, shaking the very manor itself. James didn't need to respond. He tried pleading with Walter earlier in the day. Now he had to kill him before the clock struck 12. The walls shook for a split second before Walter's voice reached him again. The others had to die. They had to become the key for a door that is deep within the stone of this place. James, that is where I'll be. Where I'll be waiting. Always speaking in fucking riddles, James thought to himself. I should have seen what he was sooner. He thought back to when he had first gotten here. Walter looked normal. Bright blue eyes, dirty blonde hair with perfect posture, pale skin, and a scar that was below his left eye from the shrapnel he had gotten during the Great War. But, as the people began to disappear or were found to be brutally murdered, he slowly changed. At first it was subtle. James was the only one that noticed because he knew him so well. His skin began to look clammy. Veins started to appear slightly around his eyes and on his neck. Subtle but noticeable once enough people died. A pungent smell of rotten meat came from a doorway ahead. Light emanated from the opening. James got to the doorway and stared at what was beyond. His stomach began to rush to his throat, holding it down. The room looked to be a guest bedroom of sorts. A large bed on the far side of the room. Framed paintings decorated the walls. In the middle, a pile of corpses were neatly stacked. The 10 bodies surrounded a stone altar that looked to be ancient. It was shaped to look like a branchless tree, having a pair of stone hands that reached out the top of it straight up. Bits of it were weathered or had been chipped away over the years. It was covered in dried blood. Candles circled the bodies about 5 feet out from the base of the pile. Fog rolled from the candles inward towards the bodies, distorting symbols that had been drawn on the ground in that area with blood. Heat radiated from the room, adding to the nausea James felt. Atop the blood-stained altar was something familiar. It was a pocket watch that floated in the air above the bloodied stone. It was his that he lost, hearing the hands of it moving as they ticked away somehow. He stepped toward the altar carefully. The fog moved away from his feet with every step once he got past the candles. The thin line of space between it and his boots revealed more of the symbols that were within its haze. James glanced at the bodies. Hard to tell who was who because of their conditions. Something, though, was consistent. They looked like husks, like they had been dead for years already. Their blood was drained. He just knew it. He saw what Walter had done to their friend Michael last night, the one who survived the longest with James. All of the body's skin looked more like leather as it tightened around their bones, drained of all moisture of any kind. Once he got close enough, he reached for the watch that floated in midair. It snapped into his hands, drawn in by his outward grasp. James looked at the time, 11:43 p.m. The watch brought back his memories of the last few days, no longer distorted, no longer impeded by the concoction that Walter had given him. He knew where he was in this place, within a barrel that once held joyful spirits. He heard Walter's voice say, "Shall you find the entrance to a place deemed divine?" The wine cellar. James hurried out of the room, The place seemed brighter now to him as he ran. The storm outside raged. Flashes of lightning lit the halls as he rushed through them. They seemed to strike more frequently the closer he got to the kitchen. The kitchen. He remembered the layout well, as it was the first place somebody had been murdered. It was Walter's girlfriend, Samantha. Her head had been hacked off with a cleaver, and her body had been drained of blood before anybody even found her. A good cover for Walter. Killing her first would make it harder for the others to suspect that he had done it. Once James had gotten to the entrance, he aimed his revolver forward, stepping into the room. It felt warm with a smell of stagnant water, like he had just walked into a swamp. The muggy air stuck to his skin, making him start to sweat after just a few moments. He looked at the door that was next to the stove on the right side of the room. He went through it, looking at the void that was the staircase just past it. He looked at his watch, which he could somehow see clearly in the blackness. 11:46 p.m. He had to move. He stepped down the steps as fast he could, almost slipping as they became more slick the farther he got down them. A string of lights that somehow still had power were lit across the ceiling, going from one end to the other. A huge barrel that James could sleep in comfortably if he wanted to was open. The muggy air flowed from it as he could see an opening on the far side, like a tunnel. He hunched over on all fours to crawl through the opening. The tunnel was like a portal that led to the past. The room beyond was much older. Clumps of moss layered the stone brick walls. Spots that you could put torches in were mounted on them. The ceiling was natural stone, like the rest had been carved out and designed to look like bricks at some point. The floor had a brick design as well. James almost slipped and fell as he took his first steps on the stony floor. The ground was slick, very slick. The path led deeper into the earth. He had to keep going. Each step he took echoed down the tunnel, making it obvious that he was going down it from a mile away. The watch he had gotten started to glow in his pocket. Once he took it out, it became a ball of white light. He could hear the hands tick away. Even those echoed in this ancient path. He looked at the time, 11:50 p.m. "Enter, friend, to see what has become of me, what shall soon become of all," he heard Walter say from deeper within the path. This time, though, his voice seemed much more human, not like the monster he had now become. After a couple of minutes of walking, James could see a turn in the tunnel ahead. He went to the corner to peek around it. What lay beyond was a stone door that was left ajar. A distinct bloody handprint could be seen in the middle of it. He rounded the corner, heading towards it. He wished he had more time to look over this place, because even the door was a sight to see. The light he held revealed the intricate carvings that were on it. He glanced at it while he carefully pushed the door open. It depicted a man in the center with what looked to be 9 mummified bodies surrounding it. 11:53 p.m. He stopped in his tracks, now beyond the doorway. A red light came from another opening about 50 feet ahead of him. The light dimmed, then became bright again, over and over, pulsing as it was accompanied by a droning hum. At its brightest, it heated the hallway he stood in extremely. Blood ran down the walls and dripped from the ceiling, pooling on the flat floor somehow, then forming into red mounds as they collected more and more blood. Streams of steam rose from them. James could feel their heat as it irradiated through his boots while he tried to avoid them. 11:56 p.m. James walked through the light, revealing Walter as he floated in the middle of a room. 9 bodies were on the floor around him, wrapped in black and gold cloth. Thorned wreaths lay upon their heads. Lit candles surrounded the bodies as well. At 4 evenly spaced spots around the large circle of bodies, 4 of those stone altars James had seen before stood. These ones, though, seemed to be carved from the ground itself. The originals, it seemed, as the one upstairs looked to be a mere imitation of these 4. They were also much larger, almost the same height as Walter as he floated in the air. The red light came from them, along with the blistering heat. The walls were pitch black, no light reflected off of them. They looked to be carved out of a black crystal of some kind. He looked at Walter, who faced away from him as he remained in the air. His arms were held straight out to the sides, palms faced up, with steaming blood dripping from them. When the blood hit the ground, symbols would form from the drops, then move to a random spot within the circle. He wore a black robe. His head then snapped to the side, now looking towards James. "Hello, James," said Walter. "I'm glad you came, to see what shall soon be done." His eyes were a dark red, thick veins protruding from around the sockets. His smile was horrid as his teeth were black. His lips were a pale pink and his complexion was akin to a corpse. His voice seemed twisted somehow, like something else spoke within him. "You've already done enough, Walter," said James. He gripped his revolver tight, then aimed it at the creature that floated before him. As soon as he had, though, the bullets within the cylinder began to glow. The gun became warm in his hand, but no sense of danger crossed his mind, only peace. A cold breeze somehow washed over him. Leaves shook in a breeze somewhere far away. It was the ammunition somehow. James looked at the gun as he saw them glow as well. "You think a gun can stop me?" He laughed. "You think it can stop what is to come? I only answer to the oldest of this world, James, for I am his scribe. Look upon my work and fear what is soon to come. A new dawn shall soon rise for all." 11:58 p.m. The revolver now shook within James's hand. The room became a blur besides Walter himself down the sights. The heat dissipated along with everything else. Focus, pure focus took him. He stood there for a moment. 11:59 p.m. A shot rang out. The bullet had hit the dead center of the man's chest. From the newly made hole, a beam of white light came from deep within. Walter screamed. The other voice from within faded from the tones, until all that remained was Walter himself. He then collapsed to the ground. The red glow from the altars faded. A gust of wind blew from the entrance of the room, snuffing out all of the candles. The only source of light now was James's watch, which now floated on its own above his head. James looked at his friend's corpse, then cocking the revolver's hammer back, shot another round into the body, then another and another until the cylinder was spent. Small beams of light came from each new wound. All became still as the new day came.
Story 6.
The hour that stayed, 11:59 p.m., glowed with a cold, feeble light on the flickering clock. Imani pulled on her coat and stepped out into the night. The door clicked loudly behind her. The air was sharp with frost, but the sky was clear and scattered with stars. She wasn't sure if she wanted to smoke or just move. Her limbs had been restless all day, and her thoughts hummed with nervous energy. The village was lit up like a lantern parade. Every house and window glowed. Curtains had been left open and porch lights were on. Lamps burned in empty kitchens. There were no sounds, though. She couldn't hear any cars or dogs barking. There wasn't even the low hum of power lines, just the brittle hush of frozen stillness. She lit a cigarette, just to hear the sound of something. The scratch of the match was like a gunshot in the silence. She looked down at her phone. 11:59 p.m. She looked back through the window to the clock inside. 11:59 p.m. The second hand wasn't moving. She frowned and looked around again. The street was empty. The trees didn't rustle. Down the street, a motion sensor light blinked on and didn't turn back off. Imani walked for hours. She thought it was hours at least. The sky didn't change. The cold didn't deepen, and the time on her phone still read 11:59 p.m. She took the main road out of the village 3 times. Every time she passed the same tilted street sign, the same overturned tricycle, the same dead crow on the pavement. Every route she took brought her back to her own front gate, like the streets were loops stitched into themselves. She tried calling 999. The ringtone echoed endlessly, before picking up and just repeating all her own words back to her. She texted her sister, watching the message send before it disappeared entirely from her phone. She walked to her neighbors' houses and found them inside, frozen in mid-step, mid-laugh, mid-tears. One woman stood over what must have been a boiling pot, now dry and smoking. A man grinned, unmoving, at a blank TV. Imani called their names and touched their arms. There was no reaction, until the baby in his crib in the Hart's house opened its eyes, blinked at her, and said something that sounded like words in reverse, like tape run backwards. In the Sutherland's kitchen, Mr. Sutherland was bleeding from the eyes in a slow, steady stream. The blood hovered in midair like oil in water. Imani saw her reflection in a window, but it was wrong. It had her shape, her coat, but the eyes were somebody else's, and the mouth moved on its own. It spoke a name she no longer used, spoke it like a spell, like it owned her. Sleep came like drowning. When Imani closed her eyes, a dream gripped her by the throat and pulled her under, deep into a world slick with ash and shadow. She saw the village as it must have been long ago, Lanterns swung in windless air, and townsfolk gathered in a ring around a bonfire. Children watched from doorways, their faces smeared with ash. A woman stood in the middle of the circle, bound with red cord. Her body flickered like a failing image, and for a second Imani thought she herself stood there. The faceless god came, moving without moving. It was a ripple in the air, a void. Where its face should have been was static, TV snow, insect chatter. Whispers too fast to follow. It leaned in close to her and tried to speak, but the words were lost in white noise that rattled her teeth. She was sweating and shaking when she woke up, and her heart pounded like hooves on stone. Strange charcoal gray symbols had bloomed on her forearms, like bruises in the shapes of letters she didn't know. They faded slowly, leaving a tingling under her skin. A message had been scrawled in chalk across the pavement outside the post office. To keep the clock, one must be given. Underneath was a child's drawing showing a stick figure inside a spiral. Nan. Imani sat in the church. The stained glass had shattered, and there was now a broken clock face where the altar had once stood. Its hands splayed like limbs. A dead bird lay in the pulpit, its eyes wide and wings twitching. The pews around her whispered, and it sounded like teeth chattering, bone against bone. The air tore open, and it stepped from the wound, unfurling. It had the shape of hourglass dust and sinew, 1,000 clocks ticking in its chest. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere. 2 doors. Choose. A door in her mind swung open to show a void filled with drifting clocks and fading stars. Stay. Become the keeper. Shed your skin, your voice, yourself. You will never move forward again, but time will. The other showed her walking down a winding road, her face serene. Leave. Forget. Let this place rot. Nobody will remember the price. Not even you. Imani thought of her past. She remembered surgeries, becoming blood, names she had buried and ones she had chosen. She thought about being told there were only 2 doors. She had never accepted that. "I'll take the role," she said, "but not the shape." The entity stilled. "I won't keep time. I'll weave it. Let it stretch, knot, loop, breathe." As she spoke, the shattered clock began to pulse. The chattering teeth sang. The bird lifted its head and screamed in a new voice that sounded like hers and like nobody at all.
Dad.
The village breathed again. Pipes groaned and radios crackled with songs from long-dead stations. The villagers woke screaming, their mouths open too wide and eyes wild with dreams they hadn't chosen. Some sobbed on their knees in the streets, clutching themselves as if trying to confirm they had weight in the world. A few never woke up at all, remaining still as wax figures with their minds lost somewhere between ticks. Time resumed, but not as it had been. Clock struck 13, and the moon rose at noon. Spring bled into autumn in the space of a breath. Snow only fell on Wednesdays. People forgot their birthdays and remembered the death dates of people who hadn't died yet. A child aged 10 years and 10 seconds and then back again. Imani was gone. Something that had been Imani walked in the shadows of all worlds, behind the reflections in every window. It moved through timelines and bent them out of shape, breaking what had been made, and then remaking what had been broken in a new form. Time no longer ticked, it threaded, and nothing would ever be the same.